Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. Sleep. We love creating unique content for you, but we need your support now more than ever. Our channel is facing some challenges, and we really need your interaction. If you enjoy what we offer, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share our videos with your friends. Every comment, like, and share makes a huge difference. Let's grow together and keep bringing you the content you care about. Thank you for your continued support. The weekend started as a simple escape from the monotony of city life. Greg had been the one to propose the idea, a secluded camping trip in the mountains, far from the reach of cell towers and civilization. "We'll disconnect for a few days, just us and nature," he'd said with that infectious grin of his. The rest of the group, Sophie, Mark, and Jess, had agreed without hesitation. By the time they reached the trailhead, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the dense pine forest. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of moss and damp leaves. They had a general idea of where they wanted to camp, but decided to explore the area first. That's when they stumbled upon the unmarked trail. The path was barely visible, overgrown with shrubs and littered with fallen branches. It wasn't on the map Greg had printed out, which immediately piqued his interest. "It's probably just an old trail," Greg said, brushing aside a branch. "Let's see where it leads." "Or," Jess countered, arms crossed, "it's a trail for people who like to disappear in horror movies." Mark chuckled. "Come on, Jess, where's your sense of adventure?" Sophie rolled her eyes but followed the group as they ventured down the path. It twisted and turned through the woods, the trees growing denser and taller the further they went. The temperature seemed to drop, and the cheerful chatter faded as an odd stillness settled around them. Then they saw it. The cave mouth was a gaping black maw carved into the side of a rocky hill. Its jagged edges framed an entrance wide enough for two people to walk through side by side. Around it, the earth was littered with broken branches and strange, crude signs nailed to nearby trees. The signs were weathered, their warnings barely legible. "Do not enter. Keep out. Danger inside." Greg stared at them with a mix of curiosity and defiance. "This is just to keep people from exploring. Maybe it's an old mine or something." "Yeah, an old mine with creepy signs. Definitely safe," Jess muttered, taking a step back. Mark, ever the daredevil, pulled out his flashlight. "Come on, we've already walked this far. It'll just be a quick look." Sophie hesitated. Her instincts told her this was a bad idea, but she didn't want to be the only one to chicken out. "Fine, but if we see bats or something worse, I'm out." The group stepped inside, their flashlights slicing through the pitch-black darkness. The cave walls were damp, glistening faintly in the light. The air was thick and cool, carrying a faint metallic tang. It didn't feel right, but none of them said a word. As they ventured deeper, the light from the entrance faded behind them. They were in the cave now, and it felt like the cave was alive. The cave seemed to go on forever, its tunnels twisting and turning like a labyrinth. The group's footsteps echoed eerily off the stone walls, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. Occasionally, small rocks dislodged from above, clattering to the ground and causing them to jump. "Okay, this is officially the creepiest place I've ever been," Jess said, her voice breaking the uneasy quiet. "It's just a cave," Greg replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "It's not like we're the first people to ever explore something like this." "Then why the warning signs?" Sophie countered, shining her flashlight along the walls. Strange marks caught her attention, patterns carved into the stone. They didn't look natural. "Do you see this?" Mark walked over, squinting at the carvings. "Looks like symbols? Maybe Native American? Or old miners left them here as some kind of marker?" "They don't look like markers," Sophie said softly, running her fingers over the grooves. The patterns were crude yet deliberate, forming spirals and jagged shapes that seemed to twist as the flashlight moved across them. "They're more like a dead end," Greg called out from ahead. His voice echoed strangely, as though the cave didn't want to let it go. The others caught up to him, only to find the passage narrowing before opening into another corridor that stretched farther than the beam of their flashlights could reach. Jess groaned. "How far are we going? This is insane. We should head back." "Just a little further," Greg insisted, his tone sharper now. We haven't seen anything dangerous. It's fine." Reluctantly, the group pressed on. The air seemed to grow colder with each step, and the metallic tang became stronger. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, her light illuminating only empty shadows. Then she heard it, a faint sound, soft, almost imperceptible. A shuffle of movement like something scraping against the stone floor. She froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The others stopped, their lights darting around the tunnel. "Hear what?" Mark asked. "Something's back there," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear I heard something." "It's just the echo," Greg said dismissively, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. He started walking again, urging the others forward. "Let's just keep going." But Sophie couldn't shake the feeling. Every time she turned to look, the shadows seemed darker, deeper, as if something was hiding within them. And then the sound came again, closer this time, a faint scrape, like claws dragging against stone. "Guys," Jess whispered urgently, "something's following us." Greg turned around, his flashlight scanning the tunnel behind them. Nothing. "There's nothing there," he snapped. "Stop freaking yourselves out." But as they continued walking, the sense of being watched became undeniable. The air seemed to press down on them, heavy and suffocating. The scraping sound grew more frequent, always just out of sight. And then Mark's flashlight flickered. The beam wavered and died, plunging them into near darkness. "Damn it," he cursed, smacking the flashlight against his palm. "Keep moving," Greg ordered, his voice tight. "Let's just get out of here." But the deeper they went, the more it felt like the cave was stretching around them, swallowing them whole. And whatever was in the darkness was following them. The group pressed onward, each step more hesitant than the last. The tunnel seemed endless, its walls closing in as the oppressive silence weighed on them. Sophie kept glancing back, her flashlight sweeping over the shadows. She swore she could see something just for a second, a flicker of movement that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "How far have we gone?" Jess asked, her voice trembling. She gripped Mark's arm tightly, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "It feels like we've been walking forever." Greg checked his watch, his brow furrowing. "That can't be right," he muttered. "What?" Sophie asked. "My watch stopped," he said, holding it up to show them. The hands were frozen at 5:17, even though they had entered the cave well before that. "The battery's dead or something." "Mine too," Jess said, glancing down at her phone. She tried pressing the power button, but the screen stayed black. No signal, no battery, nothing. "Great," Mark muttered. "We're in a cave that screws with time and electronics. This isn't creepy at all." The group fell silent again, their unease growing with every step. The air was colder now, biting at their skin despite the layers they wore. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was something tangible, something real. She stopped abruptly, causing Jess to bump into her. "What's wrong?" Jess asked. "Shh," Sophie hissed, holding up a hand. She strained her ears, listening. There it was again, that faint scraping sound like something sharp dragging along the stone floor. It was closer now, unmistakable. "Do you hear that?" Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. The group froze, their flashlights trained on the tunnel behind them. The sound came again, louder this time, echoing in the darkness. It wasn't their imagination. Something was following them. "Run," Greg said, his voice low and urgent. Without another word, they turned and bolted down the tunnel, their footsteps echoing wildly. The scraping sound grew louder, faster, as if whatever was behind them was giving chase. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she ran, the beam of her flashlight bouncing erratically with each step. "Where's the exit?" Jess cried, her voice tinged with panic. "We should have found it by now." Greg didn't answer. He was too focused on keeping them moving, his flashlight scanning the tunnel ahead. But the passage seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls twisting and warping as if the cave itself were alive. Then Sophie's flashlight caught something, a shadowy figure standing just at the edge of the beam, its form humanoid but wrong. It didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, watching. "Did you see that?" Sophie gasped, her voice shaking. "Keep going," Greg yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. The group ran until their legs burned and their lungs screamed for air. Finally, they stumbled into a larger chamber, the walls shimmering faintly in the dim light of their remaining flashlights. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, their eyes darting to the tunnel they had just emerged from. The scraping sound stopped. The silence was deafening. "Did we lose it?" Jess whispered, clutching her knees to her chest. No one answered, but Sophie wasn't so sure. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger now. Whatever was in the dark was still there. It was just waiting. The silence in the cavern was suffocating. The group sat in a tight circle, their flashlights trembling as they swept the surrounding walls. The faint shimmer of moisture on the stone did little to illuminate the oppressive darkness beyond. "Do you think it's gone?" Jess whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Sophie said firmly. She couldn't explain it, but she felt its presence, like an icy grip on the back of her neck. "It's waiting." Greg stood, his breathing still heavy. "We're wasting time. We need to keep moving until we find the exit." Mark nodded, though his expression betrayed his doubt. "Right. We just need to retrace our steps." "That's the problem," Jess hissed. "This cave doesn't make sense. We've been walking in the same direction forever, and it's like it's changing." "It doesn't matter," Greg snapped. "Sitting here won't help." He shone his flashlight down the next tunnel, its narrow opening like a black hole waiting to swallow them. The air seemed to shift, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Sophie's stomach turn. Without waiting for a response, Greg began walking. The others reluctantly followed, their footsteps eerily loud in the oppressive quiet. The tunnel twisted and turned, each passage indistinguishable from the last. The sense of being watched was omnipresent, and every so often, Sophie caught the faintest flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. "Keep your lights moving," Greg said, his voice tight. "If it's following us, I don't want to lose sight of it." Sophie wasn't sure they ever had sight of it. Whatever was pursuing them seemed to exist on the edge of perception, always there but never fully visible. Her flashlight beam wavered as her hands began to shake. She hated the thought that it might be watching her now, hidden just outside the light. Then they saw it, the faintest glimmer of light ahead, a break in the oppressive darkness. Relief surged through the group, and they quickened their pace, their steps clumsy and uneven on the rocky floor. "Is that the exit?" Jess asked, her voice breaking. "Has to be," Greg replied. "Come on." The group broke into a run, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they sprinted toward the light. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, but the glow grew brighter with every step. Sophie's heart pounded as she dared to hope they might finally escape. Then, just as they reached the opening, the scraping sound returned, louder, closer than ever. Sophie glanced back and froze. A shadowy figure stood at the far end of the tunnel, its outline jagged and wrong. It didn't move, but she could feel its gaze, cold and hungry. "Go!" Greg yelled, shoving her forward. They burst out of the cave into the blinding light of the late afternoon sun. The air was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. For a moment they stood there, gasping for breath and basking in the relief of freedom. But as they began to walk back toward their campsite, Sophie turned back to the cave. Deep in the shadows of the entrance, she swore she saw it. A figure, dark and indistinct, standing just out of reach of the sunlight. It was still watching, and it wasn't going to stay in the cave. The trek back to the campsite should have been easy, straightforward even, but the group moved with a growing sense of dread. The trees seemed taller, their shadows longer than before, stretching across the forest floor like dark fingers. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. "Do you think it's gone?" Jess asked, her voice thin and strained. "No," Sophie said flatly, glancing over her shoulder. Her flashlight was off now, but her eyes scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement. "It's still out there. I know it." "Don't say that," Jess whimpered. "We made it out of the cave. It's over." "Enough," Greg said sharply. "Let's just get back to camp. We'll pack up and leave. We're done with this place." Mark nodded, though he kept looking behind them. "Greg's right. Let's move." They picked up their pace, the faint trail winding through the dense forest. The sounds of nature, the chirping birds and rustling leaves, seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Every so often a twig snapped or a bush rustled, and the group froze, their eyes darting toward the sound. Each time they saw nothing. The shadow appeared just as they reached the edge of the clearing where their tents were set up. Sophie spotted it first, a faint silhouette at the edge of the trees, far enough to remain indistinct but close enough to send a chill down her spine. "There," she whispered, pointing. The others turned, their faces pale as they followed her gaze. It was unmistakable now, a dark figure standing perfectly still, its shape wrong in ways they couldn't articulate. "Keep walking," Greg said, his voice trembling. "Don't run, just act normal." They moved toward the campsite, trying to keep their movements steady, but their fear was palpable. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, her hands slick with sweat as she clutched the strap of her backpack. The shadow didn't move, but it didn't disappear either. When they reached the campsite, Greg began hastily packing up their gear. "We're leaving," he said, his voice clipped. "Right now." "Do you think it'll follow us?" Jess asked, tears welling in her eyes. "It already is," Sophie muttered, glancing back toward the tree line. The shadow had shifted, now closer, lurking just beyond the clearing. Her stomach churned with fear. "We can't outrun it." "Stop talking like that," Jess snapped, her voice rising. "We're going to leave and it'll stay here. It has to." Mark stepped forward, placing a hand on Jess's shoulder. "She's just scared, Jess. We all are. Let's just focus on getting out of here." As they worked to break down their tents, the shadow moved again. It didn't walk or run. It simply appeared closer, as though the space between them dissolved when no one was looking. Sophie stared at it, her breath hitching. "It's not bound to the cave," she whispered. "It's bound to us." Greg stopped what he was doing, turning to face her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we've brought it with us," Sophie said, her voice shaking, "and it's not going to stop." The drive to the nearest ranger station was tense and silent. The group had packed up in record time, leaving behind anything they couldn't quickly grab. Every so often, Sophie glanced out the car window, her stomach twisting every time she thought she saw a shadow darting between the trees. No one dared mention it, but they all felt the same presence, an oppressive, watching weight that clung to them. When they reached the ranger station, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. The station was a small, rustic cabin with a faded sign hanging above the door. Greg parked the car haphazardly and rushed to the door, the others following close behind. Inside, the ranger on duty sat behind a cluttered desk, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. He was an older man, his face weathered from years of outdoor work, with sharp eyes that immediately assessed the group as they stumbled in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting his mug down. His voice was rough, tinged with concern. "What's going on?" Greg took a deep breath, glancing at the others before launching into an explanation. We found a cave. It was off the main trail, and it had these warning signs, but we went in anyway. And now," he hesitated, struggling to find the words, "something's following us." The ranger's expression darkened immediately. He stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You went into that cave? You know about it?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. The ranger leaned against his desk, folding his arms. "Of course I know about it. Locals call it the Endless Cave, but it's not the cave itself you should fear. It's what's inside." "What's inside?" Jess whispered. The ranger's gaze was cold and hard. "We call it He Who Follows. It's a spirit, a dark, ancient thing. It's bound to that cave, but only until someone is foolish enough to disturb it. Once it attaches to you, it doesn't stop until it drains you dry. Your energy, your will to live, it feeds on it all. When it's done, it moves on to the next fool." Greg stepped forward, his tone defiant. "How do we get rid of it?" The ranger sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You don't, not easily anyway. It's bound to you now, and it'll stay that way until you—" He paused, his expression grim. "Until you go back to the cave and lose it there." "Lose it?" Sophie asked. "How?" "It's not like most spirits. It can't be fought and it can't be banished. But it is tied to that cave. If you run deep enough into its labyrinth, you might confuse it, leave it trapped there again. But you can't stop and you cannot look back." "That's it?" Jess asked, her voice rising. "Run and hope we survive?" "That's it," the ranger said bluntly. "And let me warn you, if you fail, it won't just follow you, it'll kill you." A heavy silence fell over the group as the weight of the ranger's words settled in. The thing that had been following them wasn't just a shadow. It was something ancient, something malevolent. And now it was theirs to deal with. Sophie swallowed hard. "We have to go back." "No way," Jess cried, her face pale. "We barely made it out alive last time." "If we don't, it won't stop," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "It's already draining us. If we wait, it'll be too late." Greg nodded slowly. "She's right, we don't have a choice." The ranger handed Greg a flashlight and a grim look. "Then I hope you're ready for the run of your lives." The ranger handed each of them a flashlight, the heavy-duty kind that could withstand the harshest conditions. He laid a hand on Greg's shoulder, his weathered face grim. "You have to move quickly, keep your heads about you, and don't stop. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think you see, you don't stop. Understand?" Greg nodded, his jaw tight. "Got it." "What about looking back?" Sophie asked. "You said we can't." The ranger's expression darkened further. "If you look back, it knows you're afraid, and it likes that. It'll be on you faster than you can scream." Jess trembled, gripping her flashlight tightly. "I hate this. I hate all of this. Why didn't you people seal that cave up?" "We tried," the ranger said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Concrete, steel, dynamite, you name it. It always finds a way back. That thing in there doesn't just exist in the physical world. It's older than any of us can understand, and it doesn't want to be forgotten." Mark glanced at Sophie, his usual bravado gone. "Are we really doing this?" "We don't have a choice," Sophie replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. "If we don't, it'll kill us anyway, slowly." The ranger stepped back, his face unreadable. "Be careful, and if one of you doesn't make it out, don't go back for them." Jess gasped. "What?" "It's the only way," the ranger said firmly. "Hesitation will get you all killed. Once you start running, you don't stop. Do you hear me?" No one replied, but the weight of his words settled over them like a death sentence. The drive back to the cave was eerily silent, save for the hum of the engine. The once beautiful forest now seemed ominous, its shadows deeper and darker than before. Sophie stared out the window, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "What do you think it is?" Jess asked suddenly, her voice quiet and shaky. "That thing in the cave?" Greg didn't answer. Instead, Sophie spoke, her tone somber. "I don't think it's something we're meant to understand." "Great," Jess muttered, her fear morphing into frustration. "So we're dealing with an ancient nightmare, and the plan is to play tag with it?" "It's not like we have other options," Mark said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "The ranger said this is the only way." They reached the trailhead just as dusk was setting in. The forest was bathed in dim orange light, but the cave loomed ahead, its entrance a black void that seemed to swallow the fading sunlight. Jess hesitated, her flashlight trembling in her hand. I don't think I can do this." "You can," Sophie said firmly, placing a hand on Jess's shoulder. "We all can. Together." Greg stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the dark. "Let's get this over with." One by one, they entered the cave. The air inside was colder than they remembered, the metallic tang sharper. The walls seemed to close in around them, the shadows alive with silent malice. The oppressive weight of the cave pressed down on them, stealing their breath and filling their chests with dread. As they moved deeper, Sophie's flashlight flickered, and she glanced back instinctively. A shadow lingered at the edge of the light, unmoving but watching. "It's here," she whispered. Greg turned to her, his face pale but determined. "Then we stick to the plan. Don't stop, and don't look back." The group pushed forward, the tunnel twisting and turning as if the cave itself were shifting around them. The shadows seemed to reach for them, flickering just beyond the light. And then, faintly, the scraping sound began. Jess whimpered, and Mark tightened his grip on her arm. "Keep moving," he said, his voice shaking. "Just keep moving." The run was about to begin. The entity was close, and the cave seemed to close in around them, hungry for their fear. The scraping sound grew louder, echoing through the narrow tunnel like nails on stone. It wasn't behind them anymore. It was all around, reverberating off the walls. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the cave itself was alive, constricting and forcing them deeper into its grasp. Run! Greg's voice was a sharp command that jolted everyone into motion. The group bolted forward, their flashlights bouncing wildly, beams of light slicing through the darkness. The floor was uneven, jagged rocks threatening to trip them with every step. Sophie's breath came in ragged gasps as she ran, her lungs burning from the cold air. She didn't dare glance behind her, not even when she thought she heard Jess whimpering or Mark stumbling. The scraping sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, as though the entity was right on their heels. Sophie's mind raced with fear. Was it running too? Or was it simply gliding through the darkness, always closer than they thought? "Don't stop," Greg yelled, his flashlight illuminating the tunnel ahead. "Keep going." The cave seemed endless, its corridors twisting and splitting in ways that made no sense. Sophie swore they had passed the same rock formations twice, their jagged shapes etched into her memory. The walls shimmered faintly, a trick of the light, or something else entirely. She didn't have time to think. All that mattered was running. Behind her, Jess cried out, her voice sharp and panicked. "It's closer. I can feel it." "Don't look back," Mark shouted, grabbing her arm to pull her forward. The group pressed on, their footsteps pounding against the rocky floor. Sophie's flashlight flickered, the beam dimming for a heart-stopping moment before stabilizing. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat a deafening drum in the suffocating silence between the scraping noises. Then the tunnel split ahead, dividing into two paths. Greg skidded to a halt, his flashlight darting between the two options. "Which way?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Left," Sophie screamed, though she wasn't sure why. It was instinct, a desperate hope that one path was better than the other. Greg didn't hesitate. He turned left and the others followed, their breaths ragged and panicked. The tunnel narrowed, the walls pressing closer, forcing them to run single file. The sound of scraping was deafening now, a chorus of claws dragging against stone, impossibly close. Suddenly, Sophie felt something cold brush against her ankle, a fleeting touch, like a shadow grazing her skin. She bit back a scream, her legs burning as she pushed herself to run faster. The others were just ahead, their flashlights bobbing wildly in the darkness. "Keep going," Greg yelled, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of noise. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its walls glistening with moisture. The group didn't stop, darting across the cavern and into another tunnel on the opposite side. Sophie didn't dare look back, even when she felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes on her. Many eyes, unblinking and hungry. Her flashlight flickered again, the light sputtering and threatening to die. She clenched it tightly, willing it to stay on. They couldn't afford to lose their light. Not now. The tunnel narrowed once more, forcing them to duck as they ran. The air was thick, suffocating, and the metallic tang was stronger than ever, filling their noses and mouths. The scraping sound shifted, no longer just behind them but ahead, above, all around. It was everywhere, and then they saw it. The faintest glimmer of light ahead, a promise of escape. But Sophie knew better than to hope. This cave had already twisted reality around them, and the thing chasing them wasn't bound by the rules of the physical world. The light grew brighter, closer, but so did the sound. Sophie felt the presence closing in, cold and oppressive, as though it were breathing down her neck. "Faster!" Greg yelled, his voice barely audible over the sound of their pounding footsteps and the relentless scraping. They were almost there, almost free, or so they thought. The light ahead grew brighter, the faint glow expanding and illuminating the tunnel walls as the group pushed forward with every ounce of strength they had left. Their breaths were ragged, their bodies trembling with exhaustion, but they didn't dare slow down. The oppressive presence behind them was closer now, pressing against their senses like a heavy weight. Sophie felt her legs screaming in protest, the muscles threatening to give out with each step. Her flashlight flickered again, the beam of light sputtering weakly. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to keep moving. The exit was so close, she could see it now, a jagged opening that led to the outside world, bathed in the faint orange glow of twilight. "We're almost there," Greg shouted, his voice hoarse and strained. "Don't stop." The group surged forward, the promise of freedom giving them a final burst of energy. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, her ears ringing with the sound of her own labored breathing and the relentless scraping behind them. It was louder than ever, so close it felt like the walls themselves were grinding together. Jess tripped, letting out a sharp cry as she hit the ground hard. "Help!" she screamed, her voice filled with panic. Mark spun around, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. "Go!" he yelled, pushing her forward. "Don't look back!" Sophie risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately regretted it. The shadowy figure was there, no longer a distant silhouette, but a hulking mass of darkness with faint, glowing eyes. It moved unnaturally, shifting and bending in ways that defied logic. The sight of it sent a jolt of terror through her, and she forced herself to turn away, focusing on the light ahead. The exit was just a few steps away now, the cool air of the outside world brushing against their faces. Sophie reached it first, stumbling out into the open and collapsing onto the rocky ground. Greg was right behind her, followed by Mark and Jess. They all tumbled out of the cave, gasping for air, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. For a moment, everything was still. The scraping sound had stopped, and the oppressive presence that had haunted them in the cave was gone. The forest around them was eerily quiet, the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. "We did it," Greg said, his voice shaky but filled with relief. "We made it." Sophie sat up slowly, her hands trembling as she brushed dirt from her clothes. She glanced back at the cave entrance, half expecting to see the shadowy figure standing there. But the opening was empty, a black void that seemed far less menacing in the fading light. Jess was crying softly, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Mark sat beside her, his face pale and drawn. "It's over," he said quietly, as if trying to convince himself. But Sophie wasn't so sure. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the oppressive weight of the entity hadn't entirely left them. She stared at the cave, her chest tightening as unease settled over her. And then, just for a moment, she saw it. A faint shadow lingering at the edge of the forest, far enough to blend into the trees, but close enough to make her stomach twist with dread. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Greg turned to her, frowning. "See what?" Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but the shadow was gone. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to look away. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe they really had left it behind. But deep down, she knew the truth. The shadow hadn't been left in the cave. It was still with them, waiting, watching. The group sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their ordeal pressing heavily on them. The forest around them seemed unnaturally still, the usual sounds of nature muted. Sophie couldn't shake the sense that they weren't truly safe, though the others were doing their best to convince themselves otherwise. "We did it," Greg said again, his voice more confident this time. "We're out. That thing can't follow us anymore." "Are you sure?" Jess asked, her voice trembling. What if it's still out here?" "It's not," Greg snapped, though the fear in his eyes betrayed his bravado. "We followed the ranger's instructions. We ran, we didn't stop, and we didn't look back. It's over." Mark nodded slowly, though his expression remained grim. "Let's just get out of here. I don't care where we go, just far away from this place." The group stumbled to their car, still parked haphazardly at the trailhead. The fading twilight painted the forest in shades of orange and gray, but to Sophie it only made the shadows seem deeper. She hesitated before getting into the car, her gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "Come on, Sophie," Greg said, already in the driver's seat. "Let's go." Reluctantly, she climbed into the back seat beside Jess, who was staring blankly out the window. Greg started the engine, and they pulled away from the trailhead, the cave quickly disappearing from view. As they drove, the tension in the car began to ease. Jess rested her head against the window, her breathing steadying. Mark leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes as if trying to erase the memory of what had happened. Even Greg seemed calmer, his grip on the steering wheel relaxing as the road stretched on. Sophie, however, couldn't relax. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror, where the road behind them disappeared into the growing darkness. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a flicker of movement, a shadow standing at the edge of the road. She blinked, and it was gone. The others didn't seem to notice, and she didn't say anything. She didn't want to alarm them. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her. They reached the edge of town as night fell, the comforting glow of streetlights replacing the oppressive darkness of the forest. Greg pulled into a gas station, parking near the pumps. "I'm grabbing some water," he said, climbing out of the car. "Anyone else want anything?" Mark and Jess shook their heads, too exhausted to respond. Sophie sat in silence, her gaze fixed on the side mirror. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that they hadn't truly escaped. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, standing just beyond the glow of the streetlights. It was the same shape she had seen in the cave, tall, jagged, and impossibly still. Her breath caught in her throat as her pulse began to race. She turned to Jess, her voice trembling. "Do you see that?" Jess frowned, following Sophie's gaze. "See what?" Sophie turned back to the mirror, but the shadow was gone. Her stomach churned with dread, and she felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. Greg returned to the car, a bottle of water in hand. "All right, let's get moving," he said, climbing into the driver's seat. "We've got a long drive ahead." As the car pulled back onto the road, Sophie stared out the window, her chest tightening with every passing second. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. It was still there, somewhere, watching. And as they drove into the night, she caught a glimpse of it in the reflection of the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by the car's taillights. Its form was clearer now, more defined. It wasn't just a shadow, it was something worse. Sophie's blood ran cold as it raised a hand, its jagged fingers curling in a mockery of a wave. Her breath hitched, but before she could scream, the figure disappeared into the darkness once more. It hadn't been left in the cave. It had never been confined there. It was with them now, and it always would be. Disclaimer: please do not try this at home. Engaging in any activities involving the dark web can be extremely dangerous and illegal. Always prioritize your safety and follow the law. I've always been fascinated by the dark corners of the internet. There's something strangely compelling about the idea of a hidden world where anything and everything can happen. Maybe it's the anonymity, the forbidden knowledge, or the sheer thrill of the unknown. Whatever the reason, I decided to dive into the deep web to see just how hard it would be to get kidnapped through it. Yes, it sounds crazy, but I took all necessary precautions and made sure I had backup plans in place. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, let me set the stage for you. The deep web is a part of the internet that isn't indexed by traditional search engines. This means you can't just Google your way into it. You need a special browser called Tor, the onion router, to access it. Tor encrypts your internet traffic and routes it through multiple servers, effectively making you anonymous, or at least that's the theory. Downloading Tor was surprisingly easy. A quick search brought me to the official Tor project website. From there, it was a simple matter of downloading and installing the browser. As soon as I opened it, I felt like I had entered a different world. The interface was basic, almost primitive, and there was an eerie sense of stepping into a shadowy realm where normal rules didn't apply. Navigating the deep web isn't as straightforward as surfing the regular internet. There are no traditional URLs. Instead, you use a series of randomly generated strings ending in .onion. These addresses are often shared in forums or directories, specifically meant for deep web explorers. My first stop was a popular directory called the Hidden Wiki, a collection of links to various sites within the deep web. The Hidden Wiki itself was a mix of the mundane and the terrifying. There were links to anonymous chat rooms, marketplaces for illegal goods, and even hitman services. But what really caught my eye was a section titled Personal Services. This is where things started to get really disturbing. I found a link to a forum called The Abyss. It was a place where people could hire or offer their services for various dark and illegal activities. This was exactly what I was looking for. My heart pounded as I clicked on the link. The page took a few moments to load, and then I was in. The Abyss was a dark, minimalist forum with a black background and white text. The posts were categorized into different sections. I hesitated for a moment, my cursor hovering over the section involving humans. This was the moment of truth. Once I clicked, there would be no turning back. The posts in this section were chilling. People were openly advertising their services, complete with detailed descriptions and pricing. Some of the ads were blatantly fake, but others had an unsettling ring of authenticity to them. I spent hours scrolling through the posts, trying to discern which ones were real and which were just scams. Finally, I found what I was looking for. A post titled, "Experience the Ultimate Thrill, Kidnapping Services Available." The post was written in broken English and offered a variety of packages for those who wanted to experience a real-life kidnapping. It included a burner email for contact and promised complete discretion and professionalism. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was it. If I responded to this ad, I would be taking a step into the unknown with no guarantee of safety. But my curiosity got the better of me. I copied the email address and composed a message. Subject, inquiry. Hi, I'm interested in your services. Can you provide more details on the process and pricing? Thanks. I hit send and immediately felt a rush of adrenaline. Now all I could do was wait. Days passed without a response. I started to think that maybe it was all a hoax. But then one night, I received an email that made my blood run cold. From anonymous@unionmail.com. Subject, inquiry. Hello, thank you for your interest. Our services are tailored to your specific needs. Please provide details on the experience you desire, and we will send you a customized quote. Rest assured, your safety and satisfaction are our top priorities. Regards, the Abyss team. My heart pounded in my chest. This was actually happening. I quickly composed a reply, trying to sound as casual as possible while providing just enough information to seem serious. Subject, inquiry. Hi, I'm looking for a kidnapping service. Can you tell me what the process involves and how much it will cost? Thanks. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. This was only the beginning. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I knew one thing for sure. I was in too deep to back out now. The days following my initial email exchange were filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. I constantly checked my inbox, waiting for a reply. Finally, it came. From anonymous@unionmail.com. Subject, inquiry. Hello. Thank you for your patience. For a real kidnapping, our standard rate is $2,000. This includes a detailed plan, a team of professionals, and a complete abduction. Additional services or specific requests may increase the cost. Payment is required up front to ensure our commitment. Let us know how you wish to proceed. Regards, the Abyss team. I read the email several times, each pass making my stomach churn a little more. $2,000 was a lot of money, but the part that really got to me was the implication that this was something they did regularly. It felt too real, too professional. I crafted my response carefully. Subject, inquiry. Hi, thank you for the detailed information. I'm ready to proceed, but with one condition. I will only pay after the kidnapping has occurred. Consider it a test of your abilities. If you can successfully kidnap me, you'll get your money. If not, no deal. Best, curious client. I hit send and felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. Was I pushing my luck? Was this too risky? But my curiosity and the thrill of the challenge kept me from backing down. The response came quicker this time, from anonymous@unionmail.com. Subject, inquiry. Hello. Your terms are unconventional, but we are intrigued by the challenge. We accept your condition. Be prepared. Our team will act within the next 7 days. Remember, this is a real kidnapping, and we will not notify you of the exact time or day. Stay vigilant. Regards, the Abyss team. A shiver ran down my spine as I read the email. This was no longer a hypothetical scenario. I had essentially invited strangers to kidnap me, and now I had to be on guard at all times. Every knock on the door, every unexpected noise, Every passing van made my heart race. I took additional safety measures to ensure that nothing went truly wrong. I informed a trusted friend about my experiment, providing them with all the details and a code word to use in case I needed help. I also kept my phone fully charged and accessible at all times. Days passed, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. I tried to maintain my daily routine, but the tension was always there, a constant companion. I began to question my sanity, wondering why I had ever thought this was a good idea. But there was no turning back now. I had to see it through. One night, as I was heading home from work, I felt a strange sensation, as if I was being watched. I glanced around but saw nothing unusual. The feeling persisted, though, growing stronger with each passing moment. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Suddenly, a van screeched to a halt beside me. The side door slid open, and before I could react, 2 men in masks jumped out and grabbed me. I tried to struggle, but they were too strong. A cloth was pressed over my face, and the world went dark. When I came to, I was in a small, dimly lit room. My hands were tied, and my head throbbed. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. This was no longer an experiment. It was terrifyingly real. A man in a mask entered the room, his voice calm and measured. "Welcome," he said. "You've successfully been kidnapped. Your experiment is over, but our business is just beginning. You should have known better than to play games with us." Fear gripped me as I understood the full extent of my mistake. This was no longer about curiosity or thrills. I was in real danger, and I had no idea how to escape. Despite the terrifying situation, I managed to keep my cool. I wasn't as scared as one might expect because I had a secret weapon, a team of professional bodyguards, or agents, that I had hired to ensure my safety during this experiment. They were tracking me through a hidden GPS device I had on me at all times. It was just a matter of waiting for them to find me and get me out of this mess. The man in the mask continued to speak, detailing what they planned to do with me. His calm demeanor only added to the surreal nature of the situation. But I listened intently, knowing that every word he said could be important for my agents to know once they arrived. He told me about their network, how they operated, and even boasted about the successful kidnappings they had orchestrated in the past. His arrogance was palpable, and it reassured me in a strange way. The more he talked, the more time my agents had to locate and rescue me. The room was dimly lit, with only a small lamp casting shadows on the concrete walls. I could hear muffled voices and footsteps outside the door, indicating that the place was somewhat active. I mentally mapped out my surroundings, just in case I needed to act quickly once my agents arrived. Hours passed, each one feeling longer than the last. The masked man occasionally checked on me, ensuring I was still secure and reminding me of the consequences if I tried to escape. I played along, feigning fear and compliance, all the while counting the minutes until my rescue. Suddenly, the door burst open. A group of heavily armed men stormed in, their movements swift and precise. It was my team. The kidnappers were taken completely by surprise. The masked man tried to reach for his weapon, but one of my agents subdued him effortlessly. "Get him out of here," one of the agents barked, and 2 others quickly untied me and guided me towards the exit. The scene was chaotic, but my team had everything under control. As we moved through the building, I saw the kidnappers being restrained, their operations dismantled in real time. Outside, a black SUV was waiting. They hustled me into the back seat, and we sped away from the site. The adrenaline rush was intense, but I finally allowed myself to feel the relief that had been building up. "Good job," the lead agent said, glancing back at me. "You kept your cool, and that made our job easier." I nodded, still processing the events. "Thank you," I replied. "I knew you guys had my back." Back at a safe location, I debriefed with my team, giving them all the information I had gathered. The operation had been a success, but it was clear that I had underestimated the seriousness of the situation. It was a sobering reminder of how dangerous these kinds of experiments could be, even with all the precautions in place. The ordeal was over, but it left me with a lot to think about. I had tested the limits of my curiosity and come out unscathed, thanks to the professionals I had on my side. But one thing was certain: I wouldn't be diving into the dark web for thrills anytime soon. By now, you must have noticed that I'm not your average guy. I have more money than I know what to do with, which is why I can afford to indulge in such dangerous and frankly stupid experiments. When you have the kind of wealth I possess, the world becomes a playground, and sometimes the thrills of the ordinary just don't cut it. I've always been curious about the darker aspects of human nature and the hidden layers of society. With my resources, I can explore these curiosities in ways most people can't even imagine. This experiment, trying to get kidnapped through the dark web, was just another way to push the boundaries and see how far I could go. In retrospect, I realize how reckless it was. But when you have the safety net of money and the ability to hire professionals to protect you, the line between adventure and insanity blurs. My life has been a series of such adventures, each one more extreme than the last. I've always sought the adrenaline rush, the thrill of the unknown. After the rescue, I returned to my lavish lifestyle. My mansion, filled with art and artifacts from around the world, felt like a safe haven. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of how close I had come to real danger. It was a stark reminder that no amount of money could completely shield me from the consequences of my actions. The agents I had hired were well compensated for their work, and we debriefed extensively about what went right and what could have gone wrong. They reminded me of the very real dangers involved, emphasizing that despite the successful outcome, I had taken an enormous risk. I nodded along, but part of me still craved the next big thrill. My friends and acquaintances, most of whom are also wealthy, often find my exploits entertaining. To them, I'm the guy who always has a crazy story to tell, a new adventure to recount. But after this incident, even they started to caution me against pushing the envelope too far. Despite their warnings, I couldn't help but start planning my next adventure. The dark web had shown me a world where anything was possible, where the normal rules didn't apply. And even though I had narrowly escaped this time, I felt an inexplicable pull to dive back in. I knew I had to be smarter, more careful. My curiosity hadn't been sated. If anything, it had been piqued even more. But the lesson I learned was clear. Even with all my money, I had to respect the boundaries of danger. The dark web was not a playground, and the people there were not playing games. As I reflected on my harrowing experience, one question loomed large. How hard is it to get kidnapped through the dark web? The answer, disturbingly, is that it's surprisingly easy. For a mere $2,000 and a few emails, I had orchestrated my own abduction. The dark web is a place where dangerous people are ready and willing to act on the whims of those who can pay. This experiment taught me more than I anticipated. It revealed just how thin the veneer of safety really is, and how beneath the surface of our everyday lives, there are networks and individuals operating with malicious intent. The ease with which I found and engaged these services was a stark reminder of the risks that lurk in the shadows of the internet. For those of you reading this, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of staying away from the dark web and the dangerous people who inhabit it. The allure of hidden knowledge and forbidden activities might seem tempting, but it comes with real and potentially devastating consequences. No amount of money or preparation can fully mitigate the dangers you expose yourself to. In conclusion, my curiosity led me down a dark and dangerous path, one that I was fortunate enough to navigate safely, thanks to my resources and the professionals I hired. However, the risks far outweighed the thrill. The dark web is not a playground. It's a minefield of perilous interactions that can have serious repercussions. So my advice to you all is simple. Steer clear of the dark web and its illicit offerings. There are far safer and more productive ways to satisfy your curiosity and seek adventure. I've always been a tech enthusiast, always fascinated by the layers of the internet that most people don't see. I've heard countless stories about the dark web, the shadowy underbelly of the internet where anything and everything can be found if you know where to look. Most of those stories are just that, stories. But one night I stumbled onto something that shook me to my core, and I haven't been the same since. It was a dreary Tuesday night, and I was bored out of my mind. The usual social media scroll wasn't cutting it, and Netflix had lost its charm. That's when I decided to dive into the deep web. I've done it before, mostly out of curiosity, poking around forums and reading about weird conspiracy theories. I never intended to actually interact with anyone or buy anything. But this night was different. I found myself on a forum I'd never seen before. The design was basic, almost ancient, like something out of the early 2000s. The posts were mostly innocuous, talking about different hacking techniques and sharing obscure news articles. But then I saw a thread titled, "Enhance Your Life, Scientifically Proven Method." Intrigued, I clicked on it. The post was long, written in a clinical, almost detached tone. It talked about a new type of vaccine that supposedly contained snake venom. According to the post, this venom had been scientifically altered to not be dangerous. Instead, it claimed to enhance cognitive functions, physical health, and overall performance. The writer claimed that this wasn't just some snake oil scam, but backed by legitimate research. My curiosity got the better of me. I knew it sounded absurd, but part of me wondered, what if it was true? The post had a link to an external website, which I hesitated to click. I knew the risks of following random links on the dark web, but my curiosity was like an itch that I couldn't scratch. The website was even more archaic than the forum. It had a black background with neon green text, reminiscent of an old DOS program. The homepage was simple: a brief introduction to the so-called Viper vaccine and a list of supposed benefits. There were also testimonials from people who claimed to have used it, talking about their enhanced abilities and newfound clarity of mind. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. It wasn't just the idea of injecting snake venom into my body that freaked me out. It was the clinical, almost too perfect language used in the testimonials. They all seemed to follow a similar pattern. Initial skepticism followed by miraculous results, ending with a subtle hint at the reader to try it themselves. Against my better judgment, I navigated to the order page. I wasn't planning to buy anything, just wanted to see how far this rabbit hole went. The order form asked for basic information, but what struck me was the final field: reason for purchase. It was mandatory. I typed something vague and nonsensical, just to see if it would go through. To my surprise, it did. A confirmation page popped up, thanking me for my interest and informing me that someone would contact me soon with further instructions. I didn't think much of it. I closed my laptop and went to bed, feeling a bit foolish for even entertaining the idea. But the next day, things got even weirder. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was "Viper Vaccine, Next Steps." My heart raced as I opened it. The email was brief, containing only a single sentence and a file attachment. The sentence read, "You are one step closer to unlocking your true potential." The attachment was a PDF titled "Instructions." I hesitated, then clicked to open it. The document contained detailed instructions on how to prepare for the vaccine, including dietary recommendations and a strict regimen to follow for the next 2 weeks. It also had a disclaimer stating that the company wasn't responsible for any adverse effects, and that by proceeding, I acknowledged and accepted all risks. My hands trembled as I closed the file. This was getting too real. I decided to delete the email and forget about the whole thing. But that night, I had the most vivid, unsettling dream. I was in a dark room, strapped to a chair, with a hooded figure standing over me. They whispered in my ear, telling me that I was destined for greatness, that the vaccine was the key. I woke up in a cold sweat, the words echoing in my mind. Destined for greatness. Key. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somehow this was more than just an elaborate scam. Something about that dream, the website and the email, felt interconnected, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The more I tried to distance myself from it, the deeper I was pulled in. What started as idle curiosity would soon become a harrowing journey into the unknown, testing the very limits of my sanity and reality. A week passed since I received that eerie email, and I did my best to forget about the whole incident. Life went on as usual, but a lingering sense of unease followed me everywhere. Every time I opened my email, I half expected to see another message from the mysterious sender, but nothing came, and I started to believe it was just an elaborate prank. One Saturday morning, I was heading out to run some errands. As I opened my front door, I froze. Sitting on my doorstep was a small, unmarked brown box. It wasn't large, just big enough to hold a book, or maybe a small electronic gadget. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, but my street was empty. No delivery trucks, no neighbors in sight. I bent down and picked up the box. It was light, and as I shook it gently, I heard something rattling inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was something I ordered online and forgot about. But deep down, I knew this was related to the dark web incident. I brought the box inside and placed it on my kitchen table. I stared at it for a few moments, contemplating whether I should open it or call someone. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut the tape sealing the box. Inside was a layer of bubble wrap, meticulously folded. I removed it to reveal 3 small vials, each filled with a clear liquid. They were nestled in a foam insert, along with a syringe and a printed note. My hands shook as I picked up the note and began to read. Congratulations. You are now in possession of the Viper vaccine. Follow the instructions provided previously to prepare yourself. Remember, this is your key to unlocking your true potential. Use it wisely. I felt a chill run down my spine. The vials looked so innocuous, but I knew they contained something far more sinister. My mind flashed back to the PDF instructions and the cryptic dream. This was real. Too real. For a moment, I considered throwing the whole box away, but something stopped me. What if this vaccine really worked? What if it could enhance my life in ways I couldn't imagine? I wasn't the type to be easily swayed by pseudoscience, but the methodical way this had all been presented made it seem almost credible. I decided to do some research. I spent hours on my laptop, diving into medical journals and snake venom studies. Most of what I found was alarming. Snake venom is incredibly dangerous, and while there were some reports of its components being used in medical treatments, nothing came close to what the Viper vaccine promised. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I sat back in my chair. The rational part of my mind screamed to get rid of the vials, but another part was intrigued. I remembered the testimonials, the promises of heightened abilities and improved health. Could it really be worth the risk? I placed the vials back in the box and hid it in my closet. I needed time to think, to weigh the pros and cons. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change my life forever, for better or worse. As night fell, I found myself staring at the closet door, my mind racing with possibilities. I knew I was at a crossroads. One path led to a safe, ordinary life, free from the unknown dangers of the vaccine. The other path was shrouded in mystery and risk, but also the promise of something extraordinary. The days that followed were a blur of indecision and anxiety. I went about my daily routine, but my mind was constantly preoccupied with the box hidden in my closet. Every time I thought about the vials, a mix of fear and curiosity surged through me. I spent countless hours reading more about snake venom, the supposed benefits of the vaccine, and even reaching out anonymously on medical forums to gauge the opinions of experts. Most responses were dismissive, calling it a dangerous scam. But there were a few that spoke of the potential benefits of venom-derived compounds, enough to keep my curiosity piqued. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I found myself standing in front of the closet. The decision that had tormented me for days now felt unavoidable. My life was ordinary, routine, and maybe this was the change I needed. The idea of enhanced abilities and improved health was too enticing to ignore. I opened the closet, took out the box, and placed it on the table. My hands were trembling as I took out the vials and the syringe. I reread the instructions, meticulously following each step. Clean the area, prepare the syringe, and administer the dose. My heart pounded in my chest as I filled the syringe with the clear liquid from the first vial. Sitting down, I took a deep breath and tried to steady my shaking hands. I hesitated for a moment, the needle poised above my skin. Was I really going to do this? The rational part of me screamed to stop, but the lure of the unknown pushed me forward. I pressed the needle into my arm and injected the vaccine. For a few moments, nothing happened. I sat there waiting, my heart racing. The liquid felt cold as it entered my bloodstream, but there was no immediate effect. I started to feel a bit foolish, thinking maybe it was just a scam after all. Then, without warning, a wave of dizziness washed over me. My vision blurred, and I felt an overwhelming sense of nausea. I tried to stand up, but my legs gave out beneath me. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't move. The room began to spin and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. I remember thinking, "This is it. I've made a terrible mistake." My mind raced with regret and fear, but I couldn't fight the encroaching blackness. The last thing I saw was the dim light of the kitchen fading away as everything went completely black. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the sterile smell. My head felt heavy, and it took me a moment to realize I was lying in a hospital bed. The bright overhead lights made me squint, and as my vision cleared, I saw a doctor standing beside me looking concerned. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Do you remember what happened?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and my voice came out as a croak. He handed me a cup of water, and I drank greedily. The memory started flooding back, the dark web, the vaccine, the blackout. I nodded slowly. "What did you take?" the doctor pressed. "We need to know to treat you properly." I hesitated. Admitting what I'd done felt embarrassing, but I knew I had no choice. I took a vaccine," I began, feeling a lump in my throat. "It was from the dark web. They said it had snake venom in it, but it was supposed to enhance my abilities." The doctor's expression shifted from concern to a mix of anger and incredulity. "Are you serious?" he nearly shouted. "You injected yourself with something from the dark web? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" I shrank back, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. I thought it was safe. They said it was scientifically altered, that it would improve my health. The doctor ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "You can't trust anything from the dark web, especially something as dangerous as snake venom. You're lucky to be alive right now. We've been running tests to figure out what exactly is in your system, but it's going to take time." He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Look, we're going to do everything we can to help you, but you need to promise me you won't do anything like this again. This was incredibly reckless." I nodded, feeling tears sting my eyes. "I promise. I didn't know it would be like this." The doctor softened a bit. "We'll keep monitoring you and make sure you recover fully. But please, stay away from anything that sounds too good to be true, especially from sources you can't verify." As he left the room, I lay back against the pillows, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and regret. I had no idea what the coming days would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never make a mistake like this again. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly began to recover. The doctors ran every test imaginable and monitored me around the clock. Despite their initial anger, they were professional and dedicated to making sure I pulled through. Eventually, they let me go home with strict instructions and a follow-up schedule. Funny thing though, despite all the warnings and the promises, the vaccine did absolutely nothing. No enhanced cognitive abilities, no superhuman physical strength, just a whole lot of nothing. What it did do was land me in the hospital, teetering on the edge of a very real danger. I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. Here I was, lying in bed at home, reflecting on how a single moment of poor judgment nearly cost me everything. The supposed miracle vaccine turned out to be a complete bust. Instead of unlocking my true potential, it unlocked a whole world of pain and regret. During my hospital stay, I had plenty of time to think about what had driven me to such a reckless decision. Was it boredom, a desire for something extraordinary in my mundane life, or just plain curiosity? Whatever the reason, the outcome was the same. I had put my life in jeopardy for nothing more than an empty promise. The doctors had been right. Trusting something from the dark web was a reckless move. I let my curiosity get the better of me, and it nearly ended in disaster. I was lucky to have escaped with just a stern warning and a few weeks of recovery. Every day I spent in that hospital bed, I was reminded of my stupidity. The beeping of machines, the sterile smell, the doctor's disapproving glances, they all served as constant reminders of my foolishness. My friends and family visited, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief. "What were you thinking?" they would ask, and all I could do was shrug and mutter something about making a mistake. When I was finally discharged, I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. The hospital staff gave me a stack of pamphlets about the dangers of self-medicating and unverified treatments. They didn't have to tell me twice. The lesson had been painfully learned. Back at home, I found myself staring at the closet where I had hidden the box of vials. I took it out and looked at the now empty syringes, feeling a wave of anger at myself for being so gullible. I packed everything up and disposed of it properly, vowing never to fall for such a scam again. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the paranoia that someone might come looking for me because of the vaccine. But nothing happened. No mysterious figures, no threatening messages, just the quiet reminder that I had dodged a bullet. So, lesson learned. Never again will I dive into the dark web for a miracle cure. No more mysterious vials, no more shady deals. I'm sticking to safe, boring, and thoroughly vetted methods from now on. After all, there's no point in risking my life for something that sounds too good to be true. From now on, I'll leave the snake venom to the snakes and the miracle cures to the professionals. If you ever get tempted by the promises of the dark web, take it from me. It's not worth it. Stick to reputable sources and keep yourself safe. Trust me, the real world has enough dangers without adding unnecessary risks. As I move forward with my life, I carry this experience as a constant reminder of the importance of making informed decisions and the dangers of letting curiosity override common sense. If nothing else, my brush with the dark web has made me appreciate the simple, unremarkable safety of a life lived within the bounds of reason and sanity. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be one of those people posting about their creepy experiences on the internet, but what happened to my friend and me a few months ago still haunts us. It all started innocently enough. Just a couple of bored college students looking for some thrill during a particularly uneventful weekend. Let me tell you, it escalated into something way beyond what we expected. My best friend Jake and I had heard about the dark web from various YouTube videos and urban legends. We were intrigued, but cautious, aware of the countless warnings about its dangers. Jake, a computer science major, was particularly fascinated by the technical aspects and felt confident he could navigate it safely. He'd set up a virtual machine, VPNs, and all sorts of protective measures. It seemed like a fun, harmless venture. Famous last words, right? One Friday night, we decided to dive in. We were in Jake's dorm room, the place dark except for the glow from his dual monitors. The atmosphere was eerie, but we brushed it off, joking about being hackers like in the movies. We started with some of the more benign sites, forums discussing everything from conspiracy theories to obscure collectibles. It was bizarre, but nothing too disturbing. That was until we found a link promising access to some of the more secretive corners of the dark web. Jake clicked it, and we were suddenly plunged into a world that was far more sinister. The first thing that loaded was a crude, old-school message board. The threads were a mix of cryptic messages, garbled text, and occasionally something that made our skin crawl. Posts about hitman services and other horrifying activities. We quickly scrolled past those, feeling uneasy. After about an hour of exploring, we stumbled upon a live chat room. It was supposedly a place for sharing experiences, but the vibe was off. People were discussing illegal activities and sharing links to disturbing content. We were about to leave when a private message popped up on Jake's screen. The user, Phantom X, sent a simple, ominous message. "Welcome, enjoying the view." Jake, thinking it was some sort of dark web trolling, replied with a sarcastic comment. Almost immediately, Phantom X responded with our exact IP address and the name of our university. Our blood ran cold. How did they know that? Jake quickly shut down the chat and closed everything. We were spooked but tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just a lucky guess. The real horror began the next day. We woke up to find our phones blowing up with messages. Friends, family, even people we barely knew were contacting us, asking why our personal photos were all over some shady sites. Jake and I panicked. Somehow someone had hacked into his computer while we were on the dark web and stolen photos from both of our social media accounts. These weren't just any photos, they were private ones, meant only for close friends and family. One particularly disturbing site had posted our photos under a thread titled "New Prey." The comments were vile, talking about us like we were nothing more than objects. People were discussing our appearances, making disgusting and threatening remarks. My heart pounded as I read through them, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever before. Jake, being the tech whiz he is, immediately began trying to track down how this happened. He discovered that during our dark web session, someone had managed to plant a rat, remote access Trojan, on his computer. This allowed them to access his files, webcam, and even his microphone. They had been watching us the entire time. We spent the next few days in a state of paranoia. Jake wiped his computer clean, installed new security measures, and we both changed all our passwords. We reported the incident to our university's IT department and even the local police, but there was little they could do. The dark web is a notoriously difficult place to police, and the attackers were likely in another country. That week felt like living in a horror movie. Every little noise in the dorm, every unexpected pop-up on our devices made us jump. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was a relief when, finally, things started to die down. The photos stopped spreading and the creepy messages ceased. But just when we thought it was over, Jake received another message, this time an email with the subject line, "We know everything." It was from Phantom X. The email contained recent photos of us, ones that we hadn't even uploaded anywhere. We realized with horror that they had access to our phones too. The message went on. "We know everything, where you are, what you do, what you eat, when you eat, drink, sleep. This isn't over." That's when we knew this nightmare was far from over. Hey Reddit, picking up from where I left off. After receiving that chilling email, Jake and I were on high alert. The realization that someone had access to our phones, knowing every detail of our lives, was beyond disturbing. We knew we had to act fast. The first thing we did was head to the police station. Explaining our situation to the officers was nerve-wracking. We felt a mix of fear and embarrassment, detailing how our foray into the dark web had spiraled into a full-blown privacy invasion. To our relief, the officers took us seriously. They advised us to immediately cease all online activity related to the dark web and to bring our devices in for a thorough examination. The police cyber unit worked quickly. They confirmed that both our phones and Jake's computer had been compromised with sophisticated malware. The officers reassured us that they would do their best to trace the source, though they cautioned us that it might be difficult due to the anonymity of the dark web. Over the next few days, the police contacted various hosting services and administrators of the sites where our photos had been posted. To our immense relief, most of the photos were taken down quickly. The officers also helped us secure our devices, removing the malware and advising us on better security practices moving forward. Despite the initial relief, the feeling of being watched lingered. Every shadow seemed menacing. Every unknown number calling our phones set our hearts racing. The email from Phantom X was a constant reminder that someone, somewhere, knew too much about us. But days turned into weeks, and eventually things started to return to normal. The threatening messages stopped, and it seemed like the hacker had finally moved on. Jake and I learned a lot from this experience. We became much more cautious about our online presence. We deleted old social media accounts, limited what we shared online, and invested in better security for our devices. The ordeal had taught us the hard way about the very real dangers lurking in the depths of the internet. In hindsight, we were incredibly lucky. Nothing physical happened to us, and most of the photos were taken down before they could spread too far. But the psychological impact was lasting. We had glimpsed a dark corner of the world that most people never see, and it had changed us. While we still occasionally joke about our dark web adventure, it's always with a nervous laugh. The truth is, the experience was terrifying and left us scarred in ways we didn't fully understand until later. If there's one piece of advice I can give from this whole ordeal, it's this: stay far, far away from the dark web. The risks far outweigh any potential thrill or curiosity. Hey Reddit, as I wrap up our story, I want to emphasize the gravity of what we went through and offer a word of caution to anyone considering venturing into the dark web. What started as a curious exploration for Jake and me quickly turned into a nightmare that left us feeling exposed and violated. Our experience serves as a stark reminder that even if you don't have ill intentions while browsing the dark web, the people you encounter there often do. The dark web is a place filled with individuals who thrive on exploiting others. They possess advanced technical skills and malicious intent, making it a dangerous environment for anyone who isn't prepared for the consequences. We learned this the hard way when our personal photos were stolen and distributed without our consent. The psychological impact of knowing that someone was watching our every move, tracking our locations, and invading our privacy was profound. I can't stress enough the importance of staying away from the dark web. The risks are immense, not just to your digital security, but to your mental well-being as well. The thrill of exploring forbidden corners of the internet is not worth the potential damage it can cause to you and those close to you. Take our story as a warning. Protect yourself and your loved ones by avoiding the dark web altogether. If you're looking for thrills or interesting content, there are plenty of safer and legal ways to satisfy your curiosity. The internet is vast, and you don't need to delve into its darkest corners to find excitement. In conclusion, our brush with the dark web taught us valuable lessons about digital security, personal privacy, and the importance of making smart choices online. We were lucky to come out of the experience relatively unscathed, but the fear and paranoia we felt during that time will stay with us forever. Learn from our mistakes and steer clear of the dark web. Your peace of mind and safety are far too precious to gamble with. Stay safe, everyone. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. You know, discovering something about your parents that makes you question everything. It all started a few months ago. It was a typical boring Tuesday night, and I was just browsing the internet to kill time. School had been rough that day, and I wanted to take my mind off things. I was on Reddit, scrolling through random threads, when I came across a discussion about the dark web. I'd heard about it before, mostly in scary stories or news articles, but I'd never really thought much about it. But curiosity got the better of me. The forum had this detailed guide on how to access the dark web safely. The guy who wrote it said it wasn't illegal to visit, just illegal to do illegal stuff there. So I figured, why not check it out? I followed the steps, downloaded Tor, and started exploring. The first few sites I visited were kind of boring, just forums and marketplaces selling weird stuff. I was about to give up and go back to watching YouTube when I stumbled upon a site that seemed different. It had a weird name, just a bunch of random letters and numbers. I clicked on it, not expecting much. The site was a marketplace, but way more professional than the others I'd seen. The things they were selling were pretty creepy: fake IDs, illegal goods, weapons. But what really got me was the services section. It had things like custom identities and untraceable weapons. There were even more disturbing services that I didn't want to read about. I was just about to close the tab when I saw a username that looked familiar. It was a combination of letters and numbers that I recognized immediately. It was my dad's username. He's used it for years on various forums and sites. At first, I thought it had to be a coincidence. There's no way my dad could be involved in something like this. But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the username. The profile page loaded and my heart started racing. The user had been active for years, with hundreds of transactions and glowing reviews. People were saying things like fast delivery, high quality, and trustworthy seller. I couldn't believe it. My dad is an accountant. He goes to work in a suit and tie every day. He watches football on weekends. How could he be involved in something like this? I spent the next few days in a daze trying to process what I'd found. I couldn't confront my parents, not yet. I needed more information, more proof. So I started paying closer attention to their behavior. And as I did, I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The late-night phone calls my dad took in his office, the packages that arrived at odd hours, and the locked room in our basement that we were never allowed to enter. One night, when my parents were out, I decided to take a closer look at that locked room. I'd never been interested in it before, but now it seemed like the key to understanding what was going on. I searched my dad's study for the key, my heart pounding the whole time. Finally, I found it hidden in a drawer under some old tax documents. I stood outside the door, the key in my hand, feeling like I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. Part of me wanted to just walk away, pretend I didn't know anything, but I had to see for myself. I slid the key into the lock, took a deep breath, and turned it. The door opened, and I saw a dimly lit room filled with shelves of binders, boxes, and computer equipment. It looked like a small office or a storage room. On one wall there was a large corkboard covered in maps, photos, and notes. I stepped closer and realized the photos were of people. Some I recognized from our neighborhood, others were strangers. Each photo had notes underneath, detailing personal information, schedules, and habits. I felt sick to my stomach. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just an online marketplace, it was a full-blown operation. And my parents were at the center of it. Suddenly, I heard the front door open and panic surged through me. I quickly locked the room behind me and rushed back to my own room, my mind racing. I had to figure out what to do next. But one thing was clear. I couldn't trust my parents anymore. The people who had raised me, who I thought I knew, were hiding something dark and dangerous, and now I was part of it, whether I liked it or not. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. Every interaction with my parents felt strange and uncomfortable. I noticed little things that I had previously ignored. My dad was always careful with his phone and laptop, never letting anyone else use them. My mom, too, seemed to be in on it, always diverting conversations if I asked too many questions about their work or why they needed a locked room in the basement. I knew I had to find out more, but I didn't know where to start. I couldn't just confront them without solid evidence. So I decided to dig deeper, but I had to be smart about it. I started by searching their study whenever they weren't around. It felt wrong, like I was invading their privacy, but I needed answers. One day I found a small notebook hidden in the back of a drawer in my dad's desk. It was filled with codes and dates, but nothing that made immediate sense. There were also some names and numbers that looked like transactions or deals. It confirmed my worst fears. My parents were deeply involved in something illegal. I tried to act normal around them, but it was hard. Every time my dad took one of his late-night calls, I found myself straining to hear what he was saying. I even started following him when he went out at odd hours, but he was always careful, never going straight to any place that seemed suspicious. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. My parents were talking in hushed tones in the kitchen, and I caught snippets of their conversation through the thin walls of our house. They mentioned something about a shipment and needing to clean up loose ends. It sounded serious, and I knew I had to find out what they were planning. I decided to take a risk. The next time they went out, I snuck into the basement again. This time, I brought my phone to take pictures of everything. I documented the corkboard, the binders, and even took a few snapshots of the computer screen, which was filled with encrypted emails and messages. Back in my room, I transferred the photos to my laptop and started piecing together the information. It was like trying to solve a complex puzzle, but slowly, a picture began to emerge. My parents were running a sophisticated operation, dealing in illegal goods and services through their dark web marketplace. They had connections all over the country, maybe even internationally. But the most disturbing part was the realization that they were not just small-time players. The scale of their operation suggested they were major players in this shadowy world, and from the looks of it, they were planning something big, something that involved a lot of money and a lot of risks. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I needed to tell someone. But who? Going to the police seemed like the obvious choice, but I worried about what would happen to my family. Would we all be arrested? Would I be considered an accomplice just for knowing about it? The thought of seeing my parents in prison was terrifying, despite what I discovered. I decided to confide in my best friend Alex. We've known each other since kindergarten, and I trusted him more than anyone. I called him over one afternoon when my parents were out. I showed him everything, the photos, the notebook, and explained what I had overheard. Alex was as shocked as I was, but he helped me think things through more clearly. He suggested we gather as much evidence as possible before making any decisions. If we were going to expose this, we needed to be thorough. So we spent the next few weeks carefully monitoring my parents, collecting more information without raising their suspicions. As we dug deeper, I began to feel like I was living in a spy movie. Every day was a balancing act between pretending everything was normal and secretly uncovering the truth. The more we found, the more dangerous it all seemed. But there was no turning back now. We were in too deep, and I was determined to see this through, no matter what it took. It was only a matter of time before things came to a head, and I knew that when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. After weeks of gathering evidence, I finally had enough to confront my parents. I had photos, notes from their secret meetings, and screenshots of their dark web activities. I couldn't live with the secret any longer. I had to know the truth, and I had to hear it from them. One evening, when we were all sitting in the living room, I decided it was time. My heart was pounding, but I took a deep breath and just went for it. "I need to talk to you guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My parents looked up from the TV, surprised. "What's up?" my dad asked, looking a bit concerned. "I know about the dark web," I blurted out. "I know what you're doing." They exchanged a quick, worried glance. My mom tried to laugh it off. "What are you talking about? Have you been watching too many movies?" I shook my head and pulled out my phone. I showed them the photos I had taken in the basement, the notebook with codes, and the screenshots of their transactions. At first, they tried to deny it. My dad said, "This is ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about." But I kept pushing. "Don't lie to me. I've seen everything. I know what you're involved in." Their faces changed. My mom's expression turned cold and my dad's jaw clenched. I could see the anger boiling up in them. "Give me that phone," my dad demanded, standing up. I stepped back, shaking my head. "No way, you need to explain yourselves. Why are you doing this?" They didn't answer. Instead, my dad lunged at me, grabbing my arm and yanking the phone out of my hand. My mom stood up too, blocking the door. "We didn't want it to come to this," my mom said, her voice low and dangerous. "But you left us no choice." Before I could react, my dad dragged me down the hall to the basement. I struggled, but he was too strong. They pushed me into the locked room and slammed the door shut. I heard the lock click from the outside. I banged on the door, shouting, "Let me out! You can't keep me in here!" But there was no answer. I sank to the floor, my mind racing. How had it come to this? My own parents were locking me up to protect their dark secret. I had no idea what they were planning to do next, but I knew I had to find a way out. Locked in that basement room, I was freaking out. I couldn't believe my parents had actually locked me up, but I remembered the plan I made with Alex. Before I confronted my parents, we agreed that if he didn't hear from me within a day, he'd go to the police with all the evidence we had. That was my only hope now. The hours dragged on, and I tried to stay calm. I knew Alex would be worried, and he wouldn't wait long. I just had to hold on until help came. I looked around the room for anything I could use to escape, but it was just filled with boxes and old stuff. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear what was happening upstairs. I could hear my parents moving around and talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Time seemed to crawl. I was hungry, thirsty, and exhausted, but I forced myself to stay awake. The next day felt like an eternity. My parents brought me food and water, but they didn't say anything. I tried to talk to them, to get them to explain, but they just ignored me. I was starting to lose hope when I heard a loud knock on the front door. My heart jumped. It had to be Alex or the police. There was a lot of noise upstairs, and then I heard the front door burst open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. I pressed my ear to the door again, straining to hear. Suddenly, the basement door opened, and light flooded the room. "Police! Is anyone down here?" a voice called out. "I'm here," I shouted, banging on the door. A moment later, the door to my prison was unlocked, and a police officer helped me out. I was shaking, but I felt a huge sense of relief. Alex had come through. He went to the police just like we planned. The officers quickly took me upstairs, where I saw my parents in handcuffs, looking completely defeated. It was so weird to see them like that. The police had found all the evidence we gathered, along with even more incriminating stuff in the house. Alex was there too, looking worried but relieved when he saw me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, trying not to cry. "Yeah, thanks to you." The police took statements from both of us, and it was clear my parents were in serious trouble. Their dark web operation was over, and hopefully justice would be served. As the police led my parents away, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. It was over, but the fallout was just beginning. Alex and I had done the right thing, and now it was time to move forward, no matter how hard it would be. A few weeks after everything went down, I decided to visit my parents in prison. I needed to understand why they did it. I needed closure. The visit was set up quickly, and before I knew it, I was sitting in a cold, sterile visiting room, waiting for them to be brought in. When they finally appeared, they looked different, tired, older. But there was still that cold, calculating look in their eyes. They sat down across from me, and for a moment, none of us spoke. I took a deep breath and decided to start. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice shaking a bit. "Just why?" They exchanged a glance and then looked back at me. My dad smirked, and my mom let out a small, chilling laugh. "Money," my dad said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I stared at them, trying to process their answer. "But how could you be such strangers to me? I lived my whole life with you and I never knew. How could you hide something like this?" My mom's smile widened. "You never asked the right questions," she said. It was easy. They laughed again, a sound that sent chills down my spine. It was like they didn't care about the lives they'd ruined, including mine. They were only sorry they got caught. I stood up, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "You're not the people I thought you were," I said quietly. "I hope you understand that you've lost me forever." They didn't say anything as I walked away. The door closed behind me, and I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. I had my answers, even if they were painful. My parents were strangers to me now, but I still had my life ahead of me. As I stepped outside into the fresh air, I felt like I could finally start to move on. It wouldn't be easy, but I had people who cared about me, and that was enough to keep me going. Hey everyone, this might be one of the weirdest and creepiest experiences I've ever had. I just need to get it out there because it's been haunting me for weeks now. So, here it goes. Back in high school, there was this kid named Ethan who was always super quiet. He sat at the back of the class, never really talked to anyone, and kept to himself. You know the type. Always scribbling in a notebook, wearing those big old-school headphones, and generally just existing in his own world. We all knew who he was, but no one really knew him. I wasn't particularly popular myself, but I had my circle of friends, and was friendly enough with everyone. Ethan, though, remained a mystery. He was the kind of guy you'd forget was even there until you saw him in class. And despite being in the same classes for years, I never had a real conversation with him until that fateful day. It was during our senior year, a few months before graduation. I remember it was a gloomy, rainy Tuesday, one of those days where you feel like doing nothing but crawling back into bed. I had just finished a grueling chemistry exam and was waiting for the next class to start. Most of the other students were chatting away, relieved to have the test behind them. I noticed Ethan sitting alone, as usual, but this time, he wasn't scribbling in his notebook. Instead, he was intently staring at something on his laptop. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured, why not try talking to him? What's the worst that could happen? So, I walked over and awkwardly plopped down in the seat next to him. "Hey, Ethan, what's up?" He looked at me, seemingly startled that someone was addressing him directly. His eyes were a piercing blue, almost unsettlingly so. "Hi," he mumbled, closing his laptop slightly. "What are you working on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. For a moment he hesitated, then shrugged. "Just a side project." I could tell he wasn't used to small talk, so I pushed a bit further. "What kind of project?" Ethan glanced around as if checking to make sure no one else was listening, and leaned in closer. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Now I was really intrigued. "Try me," I said with a grin. He sighed and looked me straight in the eye. "I sell cursed dolls on the dark web." I laughed, thinking he was messing with me. "Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England." But Ethan didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared at me with those intense blue eyes, completely serious. "I'm not joking." There was something in his voice that sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't tell if he was pulling my leg or if he genuinely believed what he was saying. Before I could press further, the bell rang, and we had to go to our next class. I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said for the rest of the day. The weeks passed, and I didn't bring it up again. Ethan remained the quiet kid in the back of the class, and I resumed my usual routine. Graduation came and went, and I pretty much forgot about the whole thing. That is, until my birthday rolled around. It was a small gathering at my place, just a few friends and some family. We were all having a good time when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone else, so I was a bit surprised. I opened the door, and there stood Ethan, holding a small, neatly wrapped present. "Happy birthday," he said quietly, handing me the gift. I was stunned. "Thanks, Ethan. You didn't have to get me anything." He just nodded and walked away without another word. I watched him disappear into the night before closing the door and rejoining the party. Later that evening, when the festivities had died down, I remembered the gift. It was still sitting on the table, untouched. I unwrapped it slowly, curiosity and a touch of apprehension building inside me. Inside was a small, vintage-looking doll. It was old, with glass eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. There was a note attached. "Happy birthday. Be careful what you wish for." I laughed nervously, remembering our conversation about cursed dolls. This had to be a joke, right? But as I held the doll, a strange feeling washed over me. The air seemed to grow colder, and for a moment, I thought I heard a faint whisper. I shook it off, blaming the weird vibes on my overactive imagination and the creepy story Ethan had spun. But that night, as I tried to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Little did I know this was just the beginning. After Ethan gave me that doll, I put it on a shelf in the living room, more as a quirky decoration than anything else. My friends had laughed it off when I showed them, making jokes about haunted dolls and cheesy horror movies. It was just a harmless prank, or so I thought. The first time it moved, I didn't think much of it. I came home from work, tired and ready to crash on the couch. I noticed the doll sitting on the coffee table instead of the shelf. I figured someone had moved it, maybe my younger sister who liked to mess with my stuff when she visited. I put it back on the shelf and forgot about it. A few days later, it happened again. I found the doll on the kitchen counter, staring at me with those glassy eyes. This time, I called my sister to ask if she'd been over. She hadn't. No one else had been in the house. A little unnerved, but still skeptical, I returned the doll to its spot on the shelf. The incidents started happening more frequently. I'd leave the doll in the living room at night and find it in different rooms the next morning. The bathroom, the dining room, even my bedroom once. Each time, I'd rationalize it away. Maybe I was just forgetful or playing some kind of subconscious game with myself. One night, I decided to test it. I placed the doll on the living room coffee table, made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and went to bed. When I woke up, the first thing I did was rush to the living room. The doll was gone. I searched the house frantically, finally finding it in the bathroom, perched on the sink, staring at me through the mirror. My heart skipped a beat. I still didn't believe in the supernatural or paranormal, but I couldn't ignore what was happening. The logical part of my brain was fighting with the creeping fear settling in my gut. I even tried setting up my phone to record the doll overnight. But every morning I'd find the phone turned off and the doll in a new location. I mentioned it to my friends casually, not wanting to sound like I was losing it. They laughed, suggesting I was sleepwalking, or that it was all a big, elaborate joke Ethan was still playing on me. Deep down, I hoped they were right. Weeks went by and the doll continued to move. It was always subtle, never anything more than a room or two away from where I'd left it. Nothing else in the house was disturbed. No objects misplaced, no strange noises, no unexplained cold spots. Just the doll moving. My rational mind kept coming up with excuses. Maybe I was doing it in my sleep, or maybe there was some perfectly logical explanation I just hadn't thought of yet. But the more it happened, the more I started to dread the sight of that doll. Every time I found it somewhere new, it felt like a small piece of my sanity was slipping away. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was all in my head, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. And the worst part, this was just the beginning. The constant relocation of the doll was driving me nuts. I had tried everything, locking it in a box, placing it in a drawer, even hiding it under my bed. But every morning, it would be out in the open, staring at me with those cold, glassy eyes. My frustration finally boiled over. I had to confront Ethan and get some answers. I tracked him down at a local coffee shop where he often hung out. He was sitting in the corner, headphones on, scribbling in his notebook as usual. I marched over and plopped down across from him, not bothering with pleasantries. "Ethan, what the hell is that doll you gave me?" I blurted out. He looked up, seemingly unfazed by my sudden outburst. He slowly removed his headphones and set them aside. "I told you," he said calmly. "It's one of the cursed dolls I sell on the dark web." His nonchalance only fueled my anger. "This isn't funny, Ethan. The doll keeps moving around my house. How do I get rid of it?" Ethan sighed, as if he had been expecting this. "Calm down," he said, his tone eerily soothing. "I never meant to freak you out. I thought you'd find it interesting, maybe even amusing." "Interesting? Amusing?" I nearly shouted. "It's driving me insane." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment before he spoke again. "All right, look. Since you were always good to me, I'll take it back. Consider it a favor." I was both relieved and skeptical. "That's it? You'll just take it back?" He nodded. "Yeah. Bring it to me tonight, and I'll handle it." I left the coffee shop with a mix of emotions. Relief that the ordeal might finally be over, and apprehension about trusting Ethan. But I was desperate, and if there was even a chance this could end, I had to take it. That evening, I packed the doll in a box and drove to Ethan's place. He lived in a small rundown house on the edge of town. The place looked as unsettling as he did, but I tried to push my nerves aside. Ethan greeted me at the door, took the box without a word, and invited me in. The inside of his house was cluttered with strange items, old books, bizarre trinkets, and of course more dolls. I tried not to look too closely at anything as Ethan led me to his living room. He placed the box on a table and opened it, lifting the doll out carefully. "Thank you," he said, almost reverently. "I'll take care of it from here." I watched him for a moment, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. But I knew better than to ask. I just wanted to be done with it. "Is that it?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "That's it. You won't have to worry about it anymore." I left his house feeling a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly the end. Something about the way Ethan had looked at that doll, like it was something precious, left me uneasy. Only time would tell if my nightmare was really over. After handing the doll over to Ethan, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I thought that would be the end of it, but as I drove home, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. It was like the air around me was heavier, and I kept looking over my shoulder as if someone was there. I tried to brush it off. "It's just your imagination," I told myself. But when I got home, the feeling got worse. The house was empty, but it didn't feel that way. Every creak and shadow made me jumpy. It felt like someone was there watching me. I sat on the couch trying to calm down, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I checked every room, every corner, even under the bed. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched didn't stop. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. "Ethan, something's still wrong," I said as soon as he picked up. "I feel like I'm being watched. The doll is gone, but it feels like it's still here." There was a long silence on the other end before Ethan finally spoke. "I took the doll, but not the curse." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The curse wasn't just on the doll," he said calmly. "It was on you. The doll was just a vessel. Removing it doesn't remove the curse." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So what do I do now? How do I get rid of the curse?" "You have to break it," Ethan replied. "There's a ritual. You need to come back to my place. I can help you, but we have to do it exactly right." I didn't have any other options. The feeling of dread was getting worse, and I couldn't keep living like this. I agreed to meet Ethan the next evening. That night was the longest night of my life. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing over me, watching. I kept waking up, heart pounding, convinced I'd see someone there. But each time, there was nothing. Finally, it was time to go back to Ethan's. I drove over, my mind racing with worry. Ethan was waiting for me, as calm as ever. He led me inside to a room filled with strange symbols and candles. "This will break the curse," he said, motioning for me to sit in the center of the room. I sat down, my heart pounding. I had no idea what was coming, but I was desperate for this nightmare to end. I just wanted my life back to normal. When I sat down in the middle of that room with all the strange symbols and candles, Ethan began explaining the ritual. His calm demeanor did little to ease my nerves. He said we needed to perform a series of steps precisely to break the curse. I nodded along, trying to keep my anxiety in check. Then Ethan said something that made my heart skip a beat. "For the ritual to work, I need a small amount of your blood," he said, holding up a small, sharp knife. I stared at him, my mind racing. "My blood? Are you serious?" Ethan nodded, as if asking for blood was the most natural thing in the world. "It's necessary. Just a few drops." I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there. This had gone way too far. "No way, Ethan. I'm not giving you my blood." He tried to reassure me, saying it was the only way to break the curse. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whole situation was too bizarre, and the idea of giving him my blood was a line I wasn't willing to cross. "I appreciate your help, Ethan, but this is too much," I said, backing away towards the door. "I'm done with this. Stay away from me." Ethan looked disappointed but didn't try to stop me. I left his house, my heart pounding, and drove home as fast as I could. I decided I'd rather deal with the creepy feeling on my own than get involved in whatever weird stuff Ethan was into. Over the next few days, the feeling of being watched gradually faded. Maybe it was just in my head all along, or maybe the distance from Ethan helped. Either way, I started to feel normal again. I threw myself into work and activities with friends, trying to put the whole strange episode behind me. I never spoke to Ethan again after that night. He remained the quiet, weird kid from high school in my mind, but now with a dark and unsettling edge. Whenever I saw him around town, I went the other way. Looking back, I still don't know if the curse was real or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But one thing's for sure, I'm never messing with anything remotely supernatural ever again. Some things are better left alone. I usually don't post stuff like this, but it's been haunting me, and I need to get it off my chest. So here it goes. It all started on a Friday night. My girlfriend was out of town, and I was alone at home, bored out of my mind. I decided to mess around on the internet, as you do. I've been online for years, seen a lot of weird stuff, but nothing like this. I ended up on the dark web just out of curiosity. I know, bad idea. But I was bored and didn't think anything would come of it. Most of the dark web is pretty mundane, to be honest. Lots of sketchy markets, weird forums, and some really disturbing services. But that night, I found something different. It was a plain black website with white text that said, "Find anyone." There was just a search bar and a few lines of text explaining that you could find anyone in the world just by describing them physically. It sounded ridiculous, but the simplicity of the site made it look legit in a weird way. No ads, no flashy graphics, just a search bar. I thought it was some kind of joke or maybe a scam, but I was curious, so I typed in a description of myself. Male, mid-20s, brown hair, blue eyes, about 6 feet tall. I hit enter, expecting nothing to happen. Instead, the screen went black for a second, then a map popped up with a blinking red dot. The dot was right over my apartment. I froze. How the hell did it know where I was? I slammed my laptop shut and just sat there freaking out. My heart was pounding and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next few days were a blur. I kept feeling like someone was watching me. I'd see shadows moving outside my window, hear whispers when no one was around. I thought I was losing my mind. Finally, I decided to talk to my friend Mike about it. He's really good with computers and all that, so I hoped he could explain what was going on. We met at a coffee shop, and I told him everything. He listened, looking more and more concerned as I talked. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Dude, that's messed up, but there's gotta be an explanation. Maybe your IP address got leaked, or there's some kind of GPS tracker on your laptop." That made sense, but it didn't make me feel any better. Mike offered to help me check things out, so we headed back to my place. He brought a bunch of gear with him, and we searched my apartment for anything weird. We didn't find anything. He scanned my laptop for malware or tracking software, but it was clean. It was like the website just knew where I was. "Maybe it's just a fluke," Mike said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Let's try another test." We came up with a random description. Female, mid-30s, blonde hair, green eyes, works at a coffee shop downtown. We didn't know anyone like that, but it seemed specific enough. I typed it in and hit enter. The screen went black again, then showed a map with a red dot over a coffee shop nearby. Mike's face went pale. "No way," he whispered. We decided to check it out. When we got to the coffee shop, we saw her. A woman who matched the description perfectly was behind the counter serving customers. She didn't notice us, but we were both freaked out. "This is too much," Mike said. "We should stop." I agreed, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. How did the site know? Who made it? Why did it exist? I wanted answers, even if it meant diving deeper into this weirdness. So, that's where it started. I'll share more soon, but be careful out there. The internet is full of strange and creepy things, and sometimes it's better to leave them alone. Alright, so after that freaky experience at the coffee shop, I couldn't stop thinking about the website. It was just too weird. I needed to see if it was real, or if I was just losing it. I decided to try it out again, this time on my neighbor. He's an older guy, lives alone, and I've talked to him a few times. So I typed in, male, late 60s, gray hair, glasses, walks with a cane. Hit enter, and guess what? The screen went black, and then showed a map with a red dot right over his house. This was getting seriously creepy. But I wasn't done. I needed more proof. I thought about my cousin Tom. We used to be close, but we haven't talked in years since he moved to Europe for work. Last I heard, he was in Spain. So I typed in, male, early 30s, dark hair, blue eyes, athletic build. The screen went black, and then it showed a map of Spain with a red dot in a city I'd never heard of. I had to know if it was real, so I found Tom's number and gave him a call. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hello? Tom, it's Jack. Long time no talk." "Hey, Jack. Wow, it's been ages. What's up?" "Just wanted to catch up. Where are you these days?" "I'm actually on vacation in Spain right now," he said. "How'd you know?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Just a lucky guess," I said. We chatted for a bit, but I couldn't stop thinking about the website. It was too accurate to be a coincidence. I kept testing it with people I knew, friends, family, coworkers. Every time it got their location right. I was seriously freaked out. I told Mike about it, and he was just as disturbed. "Dude, this is getting out of hand," he said. "Someone could use this for really bad stuff." He was right, but I was too curious to stop. I spent hours on forums trying to find out more about the site, but no luck. It was like it didn't exist anywhere else. Then one night, I got an anonymous message that said, "Stop searching." That was the final straw. Someone knew what I was doing. I felt like I was being watched all the time. Every noise in my apartment made me jump. The next day, I decided to take a break from all this. I needed to clear my head, but deep down I knew I couldn't stay away for long. The website was too strange and I needed answers. I'll keep you guys posted, but seriously, be careful with what you find online. Some things are just too creepy to mess with. Alright, so after that creepy message telling me to stop, I decided to take a break from the website. But honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I needed to know more. So, one night I decided to try something really weird. I wanted to see if the site could find someone who was dead. I thought of my grandma. She passed away a few years ago, and I figured it would be a good test. I typed in, female, mid-80s, gray hair, short, always wore glasses. I hit enter, and the screen did its usual thing before showing a list of people who matched the description. And there she was. Her name was on the list. Next to it, it said, deceased, and even showed the date she died. I just sat there, staring at the screen. How could it know that? This wasn't just creepy anymore. It was seriously freaking me out. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The site wasn't just tracking living people. It knew about those who had passed away too. This was getting way too real. I called Mike again and told him what I found. He was just as freaked out as I was. "Jack, this is too much. You need to stop. Someone could be tracking you, or it could be some kind of trap." He was right, but at the same time I couldn't let it go. I needed to understand how this was possible. How could a website know so much about everyone, even people who had died? I started feeling more paranoid. Every noise in my apartment made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But I was also too curious to stop. I wanted answers, even if it meant diving deeper into this creepy mystery. So that's where I'm at now. I know I should stop, but I can't. I need to find out what's going on with this website. I'll keep you guys updated, but please be careful out there. Some things are just too weird to mess with. Okay, so after finding my grandma on that creepy site, I was really freaked out, but I still couldn't let it go. I had to know how it worked. I figured maybe it was tracking my IP address or something. So I decided to try using a VPN to see if that would change anything. I turned on my VPN, set it to connect to a server in another country, and went back to the site. I typed in my description again. Male, mid-20s, brown hair, blue eyes, about 6 feet tall. I hit enter, and the screen went black for a moment. When the map came up, my heart sank. The red dot was still right over my apartment. The VPN didn't do anything. The site still knew exactly where I was. I checked my VPN settings, and everything was working fine. It showed my IP was in Europe, but the site somehow knew my real location. I called Mike and told him what happened. He was quiet for a bit, then said, "Jack, you need to stop messing with this. It's not safe. If it can bypass a VPN, it's using something way more advanced. You could be in real danger." He was right, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. How could it know where I was, even with a VPN? It didn't make any sense. I felt scared and frustrated. I needed to know who was behind this and how it worked, but I also knew I might be putting myself at risk. I decided to get out of my apartment for a while. I went to stay with my parents to clear my head and figure out what to do next. This whole thing was way over my head, and I needed to be smart about it. So after everything that happened, I decided to reach out to a few friends who are hackers and really good with computers. I needed their help to figure out what was going on with that creepy website. I told them everything, showed them the screenshots, and even let them check my laptop for any weird stuff. They looked into it for a while, but they couldn't explain it either. One of them, Jake, said, "This is beyond anything I've seen. It's like it's using some kind of AI or advanced tracking tech that we just don't have access to." They tried to dig deeper, but no matter what they did, they couldn't find anything unusual. It was like the website was cloaked in some kind of digital invisibility. They even scanned my laptop for malware or backdoors, but everything was clean. They were as baffled as I was. After that, I decided to just forget about it. It was too much. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how dangerous that site was. I didn't want to mess with it anymore, so I uninstalled everything, wiped my laptop, and decided to stay away from the dark web. But here's the thing. I won't mention the name of the website. It's way too dangerous, and I don't want anyone else getting caught up in this mess. If you ever come across something that sounds even remotely like it, stay far, far away. Trust me, some things are better left unexplored. So that's my story. Be careful out there. The internet can be a really dark place.